thing is, with the rejection, when we're getting that feeling, that we're not good enough, and we're looking for that worth, we're looking for that value, that's what can lead us into that next area, that temptation, which is even in the story I had with the gentleman and that was always looking for the next thing at work, okay? Because he was at work and because he was busy, constantly looking at the next thing, and his focus was again on what he doesn't have, and not being content with where he is right now. Okay, he had that time, okay, and now those desires, because we're in that temptation phase, those desires, we're focusing on that, and that's what gets us hooked. That's what actually can lead us now to the action. Okay. James 1:14 and verses 14 and 15. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. And then when desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. And that's that spiritual death. It's that death of our spirit, because we're denying it. We're again going to that flesh. We're allowing the flesh and the desires of the flesh to be fulfilled, and the spirit can't live. This is where the enemy gets their foothold. But Corinthians 10, okay, the encouragement we have here, verses 13 and 14 says, no temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, and who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. Okay? The enemy knows the desires of our heart. Okay? But the thing is, even in that, God makes a way of escape, and it's through him. And so it's turning to him. Okay? The enemy knows the desires, and God knows the desires. But God knows what's going to bring the fulfillment and what's going to bring the happiness in our lives. And so when we're going to him, when we're turning to him, it reminds me of the one story that is brought out in Numbers. It's a very small passage, but it talks about where the Israelites were mumbling and complaining, and God got tired of it, and so he sent these serpents to strike them. And if they were struck, these serpents were very poisonous, and they were dying. And now they were murmuring and complaining about that and saying, you got to do something here. And so God instructed Moses to make that brass emblem with a serpent on it and place that on top of his staff, and that so that whoever was bitten, whoever was struck by one of these serpents, needed to turn and look to that emblem, to that brass emblem, in order not to die. If they did that, they wouldn't die. And see, it wasn't enough just to know that that's what they had to do. They could know it's what they needed to do, but if they didn't do it, they would die. And that's the same thing here. That's what God's saying. He makes the way of escape. He knows that the enemy is striking us. He knows he's hitting us with our desires. He knows that the enemy is getting us into that temptation. But we need to make the choice. Okay, he's the way of escape, but we have to choose him. We have to turn to him. That's the way of escape. Because when we're in that temptation, when we're in that place, this is where, as we begin to entertain those thoughts, and the longer we entertain those thoughts, the stronger it gets, the stronger the desire, and the more enticed we are. Okay, that's where they're watered and fed. The enemy knows the things that the flesh desires, and is going to throw whatever he can to get us into that action, to get us into that sin, for that sin to be birthed. So it is, again, it's that turning to him. It's understanding that even in the temptation phase, okay, when the temptation's there, it's what are you going to do with it? Okay? It's understanding that yes, when I'm in this, okay, I'm there's still a way of escape here. But this is where he's bringing these actions. These are where he's starting to bring those thoughts. There's is where he's starting to even bring some of those images back into our mind. Okay, this is where he's using those lies to get us to find some kind of peace, to get some kind of satisfaction, so that we're not bothered by those hurts. We're not bothered by those lies anymore. And it's in this phase really where we need to be the most spiritually active. This is when, just like I was talking about with that story in Numbers, that is where we need to be strong. That is where we need to be the turning. That is where we need to be saying, okay, I understand the temptation. I understand the desires. I understand the hurt because I know my lies. I know the things that I'm believing, but I'm choosing not to go there. I'm choosing to turn to the Lord. I'm choosing to go to his word. I'm choosing to make that phone call to someone to help me out. I'm choosing to go to the scripture. I'm choosing the Spirit. I'm choosing God. I'm choosing, okay, this is again the crucifying of the flesh. Yeah. Everything in my body is telling me to go for the sin, just like hanging on that cross. Everything in my body is telling me I need to breathe. I want to breathe. Okay? But when I go to pull up to breathe, when I go to push up to breathe, I'm in pain. And that's what happens when we step over that temptation, when we go into that next phase, then comes the pain. There's that maybe brief satisfaction, but then it's the pain. And that's where we need to stop. Okay? It is again here where we need to be turning to the Lord. Okay. It is really before we even get to this phase, and one of the things that we'll discuss in the support group is just, this is when we recognize what's going on here, when we're recognizing the beginning of that routine, we're recognizing that the temptation is starting to come here. What's our next steps? Okay, we need to have a different routine. When we're in a certain place, we need to choose something else. We need to choose something different. We need to be going, again, making that phone call. We need to be getting into the Word. We need to be flipping on some music. We need to be pulling out those scriptures again to remind us. We need. We talked about the, knowing our giftings. If our giftings, and the thing that really speaks to us, where we really feel alive in our spirit, is in worship and in music. Maybe it's sitting down and writing a song, even about how we're having to sacrifice what we're doing now. Maybe it's pulling out that music and playing, whatever. But again, it's distracting us. It's getting us away from the old routine, and it's actually because it's a gifting within us. It's something that God's placed within us that we're going to feel a connection like never before, because it's now our spirit that's coming alive. We're allowing the Spirit to be fed. We're allowing Him to become stronger, and grow in that. And again, that we can overcome this temptation. That is our way of escape. But what is key is to have those steps in place, to have that plan in place before we get there. Because if we're in there in the middle of that temptation, or we've been given thoughts or entertaining those thoughts, okay, we're going to become single focused, and it's going to be much harder to break that pattern. So we need to have these plans in place ahead of time. That's how we overcome the temptation. That's how we can prevent ourselves from going from that temptation and actually allowing that action to be birthed and actually stepping into it. Another thing that we can do that can help and is to recall the consequences of the past when we did fail. A reminder of that guilt, that shame, just how badly that brought us down. But then having that again along with God's promises to lift us up. So that, again, we're not getting into that condemnation and we're not driving ourselves down even deeper and feeling that hopelessness and helplessness. And it's all of this working together. But we can overcome this temptation. We can stop the cycle before we go into that next phase. And so this is where I'm going to cut it off today. I pray that there was some good information in here for you out there, stuff for you to think about. Again, if you have any questions, you can definitely contact us here at Crossing Jordan Ministries. My email is bill@crossingjordan.org, and our number is 717-819-9650. And I'm here to provide any help, any support that I can to you, because you're not in this battle alone. And so God bless. And our next session will be on the last two phases, which are the action and the reaction.